I do want to bring in my first guest, Joy Yang, Head of Product Management and Marketing at MarketVector Indexes. Joy, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Kristen.
All right, let's start by asking about what these NVIDIA results could tell us today.
Yeah, everybody's watching NVIDIA because it's becoming, as you said, the proxy for the AI story. So it not only has impact for the NVIDIA price, but for the whole semiconductor industry as well as markets overall. So we're watching NVIDIA, but as you also mentioned, the announcement comes after the market close. So more importantly, we're also going to be watching Bitcoin price because crypto markets trade in real time, 24/7. And the lesson we took away from last time is that, good news is not always good news. And we saw last quarter's earnings announcements came out and they were pretty good. They beat expectation, they beat guidance, and yet when the markets opened the next day, the stock price dropped 8%. So that was wiping out $200 billion in shareholders' value. So yes, we'll be following Bitcoin to see how it reacts in real time and how investors are thinking about the announcements.
Very insightful, Joy. Of course, we follow this on a quarterly basis. You follow it in depth. Any lessons that we would have learned from last quarter?
Yeah, so last quarter again is that there are both short-term and long-term players in this market, and they have different objectives. So, this is a very volatile stock. So there are short-term opportunities to trade around, but it's also a long-term AI story.
Yes.
And AI, is going to take investments in infrastructure, and that's what's happening now. So the productivity and the profitability that comes with it, it's still unknown. And we know this is a very complicated landscape.
Right.
Markets are competitive. So as we see new players and disruptors come into the industry, who's going to be the winners? That's still also unknown.
Yeah, competition, I think, very important going forward. As we know, NVIDIA is the purest play in the market for AI right now. What about the future? What could it hold, and what is the current signal telling you?
Well, this is a company that's already up 200% year to date. How far can it go? And we've seen from history that stocks like Cisco, they can rise pretty far, but they can also fall pretty quickly.
Right.
So what we want to do is keep an eye on the theme. And for us, NVIDIA is in our fabless semiconductor index. So we're keeping an eye on these chip makers that are designing kind of the intelligence behind AI infrastructure. And there are companies like ARM in there, also up around 90% year to date.
Yeah.
And the other index we're looking at is our AI Big Data Index, and we find companies like Palantir, and that company's up over 280% year to date.
It's interesting. So as we look at NVIDIA, as we look at the technology landscape as a whole, obviously many people are looking to NVIDIA's results to get a sense of what could be ahead. You mentioned volatility. What can we be sure of when this company reports?
Well, we can be sure it's going to be volatile.
Yeah.
It's already, and we've seen in the past few days, up 4%, down 3%. This is a company with 50% annualized volatility, so that's on par with Bitcoin. It can be up 50% over a year, but also down 50%. So we know that it's also more than just AI story. The semiconductor industry is very complex. It's globally integrated. And so we know that as Trump comes into office, and we know that he's going to have disruptions around trade policies, foreign policies, and views around our national security, that there's going to be a lot of volatility reflected into the semiconductor industry because of how globally connected it is.
It's interesting. We do see that investors seem to be optimistic, at least heading into the market open today. And these results, NVIDIA shares, last I checked pre-market, were higher, and we do see the major indexes fractionally higher today. I'm curious to dive a bit deeper, Joy, into your last point there as to how Trump's policies, his campaign promises, specifically when it comes to trade, could have an impact.
Well, we know he's made some very bold, campaign talks about, maybe 60% tariffs on China. And what we don't know is, this is meant to protect American industries, but what are the implications or the impact globally as, our global partners retaliate? But we know that one thing for sure is that geopolitical risk is heading up, and people are investing in defense, and we've seen defense securities go up in the last month, the last few days, and those are also good for semiconductors because they underlie most of the high-tech infrastructures that are required for all of these industries.
What else is on your radar, Joy?
Well, we're also watching Bitcoin. Yesterday,
Yes.
we saw the options around IBIT ETF launched, and we saw huge trading flows, 1 billion in one day. That's amazing. And also we've seen 1 billion flows into these ETFs over one day. That's amazing. So, this is kind of the opening of kind of the whole crypto asset industry for institutional, investment quality trading and volume.
Yeah, we've been watching crypto absolutely on a tear. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and dive deeper in the show in a few moments. Joy Yang, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Joy Yang in studio. She's the head of product management and marketing at MarketVector Indexes. And joining me now to talk more about these markets as we are officially open for trade is Joy Yang. She is the head of product management and marketing at MarketVector Indexes. Joy, great to have you back.
Thank you, Kristen.
All right, so as we start this trading day on Wednesday, I do want to dive a bit deeper into how we might see markets position themselves in the wake of the election results that we got. We're having more cabinet appointments now come forward by the Trump administration. What does that mean for stocks?
Yeah, so we're starting to see Trump appoint key members to his cabinets and positions, and we know the American voters have voted for change the status quo, and it seems like he's delivering on that with some very bold appointments, and it's going to disrupt how healthcare is run, how our defense sector is run, how our innovation investments are run, and that's also sending a signal to our global allies as well as enemies. Year to date, we've seen our defense index up almost 40%. And it's not just US companies, it's also global companies. And I think as he sends the message that we're going to back off from supporting global allies, other countries are making investments back into their own national security. So global defense companies are going up overall. And one of the top securities in our global defense index is Palantir. And when Trump was elected, that stock has now been up 40% since election day. So amazing rise because it's kind of on this nexus of not only as a defense company, it's also an AI company, being in the AI data sector, and also a innovation company.
I remember Palantir's IPO here at the stock exchange just a few years ago. I also want to talk, Joy, about how our viewers, potential investors, should be considering looking at their own portfolios during this moment in time.
So definitely disruption is going to cause uncertainty. So markets don't like uncertainty. So we think investors should be diversified, whether it's, diversify around NVIDIA, broaden your views out to a broader semiconductor or even fabless semiconductor portfolio, but also, hedge your downside risk with alternative assets, whether that's gold or even Bitcoin. They're going to be assets that are not correlated with your main holdings, and that's important because we don't know what directions markets are going, and we know there's going to be a lot of volatility coming up.
I know you mentioned volatility when we spoke at the top of the show, and we've seen some choppiness of late. Of course, geopolitics, an element in that factor yesterday as well. People seem to be bullish on Bitcoin. I think that's a general consensus takeaway here. And another one of my guests whom I spoke with in between our segments also said that gold is an attractive investment too. Those were his words. Sounds like you agree with that.
We've seen really all-time highs in both Bitcoin and gold, and so it had a lot of momentum. And with momentum, we expect some pullback, and we've seen that in gold recently. But going forward, we know with volatility that it's good to hedge with assets that aren't impacted by the same macro drivers as your main holdings. And we also say, to people that there's more than just Bitcoin.
Yes.
Right. So there's thousands of other crypto tokens out there. So Bitcoin is a store of value and has both risk on and risk off characteristics. So that's interesting. But it's also an asset class that's evolving. So take a look at all the alternative options you have in this space.
How much does the Fed and the expectations still, the last I checked, that we will get a 1/4 percentage point rate cut in December factor into the way that you look at markets?
Well, I think that's still also for us never a 100% probability.
Right.
So markets are forward-looking. So even though we may expect it to be another rate cut, but we also know that there are other policies out there that may be inflationary. Inflation isn't at the 2% target that the Fed wants, and also the Fed leadership may change soon also.
Yeah. I did see, actually, I just checked, just a 55% chance now expectation among traders in the market that we get another 1/4 percentage point rate cut come December. Yesterday it had been about 60% or so. So I think it's fair to say at this point it is a bit of a coin toss based on how the Fed moves forward in the wake of the data that we are reviewing, and of course those election results. Joy, I also want to get your quick take on earnings, because by and large companies beating expectation, that usually is the case. How does corporate America look to you?
I think earnings, again, they're just one data point in time. So I think earnings will have some short-term volatility, and we've seen some great earnings announcements recently. But we're headed into a new presidency. We're heading into new geopolitical uncertainty. So I think it's always good to keep a long-term outlook as we get the earnings announcements.
Joy Yang, she's with me here. She's the head of product management and marketing at MarketVector Indexes. Joy, always a pleasure, and thanks for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.